Welcome back once again to the Writer Brothers podcast. My name is Petey York, your host this evening. Today I am joined by my co-producer, Pollo Zapatos.
Pollo
And
Zapato.
today, huh?
Pollo
I'm
Zapatos.
I'm gonna say that and butcher it like a good American every single time I say it, but I'll get it eventually. It'll be our last episode. I'll finally say it right. Today, we are joined by our special guest this evening, Carrie Owen, Witch in Residence. Carrie Owen, why don't you go ahead and take a second, introduce yourself, and explain why you're here today?
Absolutely. Hi, everybody. My name is Corion. I am YouTube's unofficial witch in residence. I typically am on various streams talking about pop culture and my take on it as a spiritualist, occultist, and generally purveyor of all things weird and strange. I was so graciously invited to the channel after these fine gentlemen managed to make it onto Doomcock's channel, and we got to talking. And yeah, they were gracious enough to invite me here, so I'm ready to go and ready to chat about just about anything.
All right. Well, first, that brings us to our first topic of the night. Now, get a little music going in the backdrop there. Today, we're going to be talking about Apple TV's new show Severance, the psychological thriller that takes place in, I wouldn't really say quite dystopian type corporate world just yet, because well, the basic premise of the show is that it takes place in a small town. I believe it's Delaware, is what I understand, where the corporate world has introduced this new concept where what it does is it basically separates your work memories from your playtime memories. As a concept, it sounds pretty awesome, right? You go into work for 8 hours, you do your job, and then when you're done, you have no memory of the experience. Your day starts when you go into the elevator, and then you end it after you get off. Sorry, we're still figuring out our levels here. All right, so we'll go ahead and start with our first guest, Mr. Carrion. What is your initial impression of Severance?
Well, I mean, I've only gotten through the first 2 episodes so far. It's definitely shaping up to be an interesting concept. So far, I have enjoyed Christopher Walken in it. I think it's an interesting idea. I definitely think it's what bosses in previous jobs I've had have certainly wanted to get rid of the out of work talk during work. That being said, I feel like there's definitely an interesting, sinister undertone that I think is going to play out more as the series progresses. I mean, we're definitely looking at, a very, could go dystopian at any moment kind of world. Reminds me a lot, actually, also of the show Dollhouse. That was a ancient Joss Whedon thing before he was a terrible human being. Where they'd write new personalities to individuals during the course of the show. So I feel like Severance has definitely got some interesting ideas. I'm curious to see where it goes from here and how the whole story plays out. You're muted, my friend.
Gotta get used to the process still. I think the concept itself is really amazing in of itself. That regardless of what the show's plot goes to, I'm just going to be glad to have at least watched something like this. This is basically the reason why I love sci-fi as much as I do. It's not, I mean, not really an original concept. I mean, originality is kind of overplayed at this point, but it takes ideas and it puts it into this reality of what is your work self going to be like? How are they going to, what are the consequences of what sounds like a great idea? And so far, I mean, the show has just really got you by the edge of your seat without being super I mean, the best way to describe it is it's excitingly boring. Is how I would probably describe it. And it does such a great job of keeping you like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen next? But there's no guns. There's no shooting. Nobody's getting killed as far as we know. And I like it. I'm really, even however the plot plays out, I think it's just going to be a good concept to just explore in of itself. So it gets an automatic pass and recommendation from me to at least watch once. John, what are your thoughts?
I find it extremely interesting. I think it's like one of the scarier slow burns I've watched in a while, with everything from like the break room being this like terrifying place you don't want to go to like the fact that it's not necessarily like everybody's severed as far as we can tell. Because like there's these 4 characters here in this photo, and then there's also like their like bosses that may or may not be like severed, because they seem to be able to roam free and like watch you. At least that's what's like being alluded to. And that whole conversation seems really confusing, because it's like, who are they picking to be severed and why? I feel like there's a little bit of a like mental instability among the chosen, and like they're playing on it while also using it to their financial benefit. It's pretty interesting, and it just makes me want to figure out what's going on. It keeps making my brain explode with possibility, and I love that about a show. So I'm definitely tuning into the finish.
Absolutely. Carry on. Any follow-up thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is definitely asking some very, very interesting questions, right? I mean, if we even just start with the concept of what are you like when you don't have your memories, right? And taking it to even more interesting places of, if you remove somebody's personality, what's left of them, right? And how are they going to behave? And yeah, I definitely think that Christopher Walken's character, I don't necessarily think he's been severed. I do think that the trying to enforce discipline with something like the break room, which really seems more like a break the human room, is a fascinating idea. And I mean, could you even raise a hand or be upset about a problem if, the you, when you're out of the office, doesn't know about it? Right?
Yeah.
Like, this seems
no
like
time to mull anything over.
Right. This completely seems like a evil corporation's wet dream when you really think about it, right? Because they can really control the flow of information in and out of that building.
Oh yeah, Facebook and Google must be salivating over this show. Like, okay, how do we make this happen? And it's like, no, guys, the point of the show is to not do that.
Well, that's like why my point is like their job seems very like specialized, because it's not like they know what they're doing. They didn't get any training. They're like the premise was just stare at the numbers till you get a feeling, and that feeling will tell you which box to open. And it's like they're just numbers, and it's really a trip. And that's why I brought up the like mental instability thing, is because like the characters are very sporadic, and like they're diverse in their like outie is what they call it in the show. Their outside personality is very like barely holding on to a thread. And if you notice, the main character, he was like losing his mind when people were calling him a slave. He was like, no, people who severed aren't slaves, except like he doesn't even know what he does. So I don't know, it seemed really like he's definitely dealing with a conundrum that he has no idea how to feel about, because he doesn't have time to think all of his thoughts through in a day. And I think that's a weird thought.
Yeah, well, and the actor, everybody is doing a fantastic job so far. Like, by the end of episode 2, I was like, okay, do I get to watch episode 3 now? I gotta wait a week, which, works for us. Something to talk about at least once every week. Give a little review recap, so to speak. Going with the discussion, a thought occurred to me that the possibility, what if there is, because you make a good point, it kind of is a plot hole right now. But this show does a very good job of explaining things backwards. The cinematography and the music for this really just boost the show all that much more. And the first episode where you see Helly, when she's trying to leave and she keeps coming back. I mean, the editing was fantastic, but I watched it a couple times to make sure I understood what was going on. And of course, sure enough, they confirmed it in the second episode that every time she was going outside, her memory was switching back to her normal personality, and then she was being coached back in. And I thought that was just really well done. The fact that they had it go back and forth, like she couldn't leave and she couldn't understand what was, the innie couldn't understand what was going on. But you bring up a valid point about the training, or rather lack thereof, that it seems. And I'm just wondering, what if there's a third Severance that takes place that is used just to implant the training portion, but it's meant as more of like a subconscious conditioning? And that's what training consists of. And then they kind of delete the memories as far as like what happened. But because it was training muscle memory, that's why it's still imprinted. So maybe that's why that's part of what goes into PD having trouble with his reintegration. He's not just reintegrating one set of memories. He might be integrating multiple, because who knows how many different personalities they've created and zapped over the course of them being placed in this work environment.
Well, my theory on the job was actually that, like, while I was watching it, was maybe personal experiences get in the way of allowing a person to observe these patterns. So removing those personal experiences is actually making the job possible.
That's an interesting thought. Based off of what Parker was just saying about the using like different forms of training, what if that's part of that break room you described, Corian, with like the emotion is like they're having a PTSD in the numbers. So part of the breaking is just staring at the numbers while getting a certain like feelings of emotions, so that they can then, and when they go out of that emotion room, they're like, okay, I'm refreshed and I'm recentered and I'm good at my job again. And all it is just like reteaching them how to be better at following the rules emotionally. Like it's like making them, like triggering them every time they see the numbers, because they like torture that body, like torture that emotion out of them in each instance.
Oh, it's possible. I mean, kudos to Ben Stiller for directing something this complicated, but making it feel, this intriguing along the way too.
Yeah, right out the gate, we're already coming up with crazy ideas. I think that's how you can tell a show is interesting at the very least, but definitely worth the watch, because it makes it more fun to wonder what's going to happen each week between.
Yeah, and honestly, the entire cast is just playing. Everyone is doing such a fantastic job of making this world believable, and not just because they're playing off each other very well, but it's also I gotta give credit where due to the cast, at least the ones that we've seen on the outside world. So I'm curious to see the differences that they are able to exercise in their craft of acting between the innie personality and the outie personality. I mean, I won't be surprised if one of them is like literally the same person inside and out. I think that would be an interesting trope to play on. But I also got to give credit to the writers for this, because I did not expect his neighbor to also be his boss. And also, as John brought up, I don't know if she's severed or not. I can't tell, because she's just, at first you think, oh, she's the annoying neighbor that's just giving him a hard time about the garbage cans. So she's obviously just one of those crazy types. You don't even think about her, and you're just like, yeah, I got one of those, or I've had one of those before. Anyone who's ever lived in a house in the city, chances are you've probably had that neighbor that just doesn't understand the way things work, especially in an HOA. There's always the new guy that moves in and can't follow the rules. So they use that to play off kind of that sort of stereotype. And wow, like the second that she started speaking, my wife goes, "Oh, it's his boss," and I'm like, "No way! Are they really playing it that close?" And sure enough, and you can't tell. The way that you watch her performance, you're like, is she is she all there, or is she severed too? What's going on? And so, yeah, it creates more questions, which creates more discussion. And again, this is why I love sci-fi right here. This show is exactly why I love sci-fi. When you create unique concepts like this and they're thought-provoking and they cause just discussions and theories and the potential consequences of, oh, what if we tried that in real life? And I'm already 2 episodes in and I'm like, no.
Yeah, it is absolutely dystopian. Go ahead, Corian.
Yeah, I was going to say the only thing that I'm concerned about is they are definitely raising a lot of questions, and I'm hoping we're going to get answers in a reasonable time frame. Like, if they don't start answering things by, like, I would say episode 4, or at least giving us a general idea, they're going to be in trouble. Because I don't know if they're going to hold the audience with just mystery box after mystery box, right?
Yeah. Cozy Koala in the chat says, it's the smirk that she has at the end of the 2nd episode. Yes, I completely agree with that. That's really like, it's kind of like, is she just smiling to be cordial, or is that an indicator of, I actually know everything, I'm not severed? And so I'm ready for more. But you do touch on a valid point, and, you know, we'll probably, this will probably step on some toes here, but we do have our one of our mutual independent content creator friends has boldly stated openly his distaste for Lost, and I'm in agreement with him to the extent of that show did not feel like it had its ending planned out. And that is one of the, you bring up a very valid point, and I'm not just trying to call out Lost. Mystery box writing in general, I think, is one of the greatest frauds ever given to storytelling, because all it does is hype, and then when it comes time to deliver, you're like, well, what did I just spend 3 weeks of my life watching, you know? WandaVision, as good as a lot of those concepts were executed, I just felt kind of, it didn't really, I felt that one was one of those more hype and then failed to delivers types, which is unfortunate, because I did like a lot of what that show was doing. And of course, it also comes down to personal preference too. Like, what expectations does the audience set for a resolution? And when that expectation isn't met, then the disappointment comes in. And I'm definitely guilty of that. I'll come out and say it. Like, Rogue One, I initially hated because it didn't follow any of my fan theories. And then when I watched it again with somebody else who was more rational about the film, that they just wanted to enjoy the movie, I was like, okay, I can see the appeal. It's not as terrible. It was only bad because I created it in my head to be bad. But it does do a lot of good things, and people like Rogue One, so I don't know if it's this. So to relate that to this, yes, my fear in the back of my mind is that we'll get to the end of the resolution and it'll just be, oh man, what? But like I said, for me, it still gets a pass for at least trying to explore the concept. So if they've got, it's fine to do mystery box writing, and I think the best way to do mystery box writing is just have your ending written down. Have your ending written out. You don't have to have your whole story arc, but have the goal, have the end of the line out there and ready to get there. And then you can have all the fun you want getting to the end point. And in the end, you might hype yourself up a little too much. But if your end goal is planned from the start, it'll likely go over better.
Yeah.
And so that's what I
have a lot of faith in this one. Honestly, I've been following Apple's latest releases lately. So I've watched the Ted Lasso and Suspicion and Invasion, and even I want to say it was Macbeth. I'm bad with the name. The newer one, but I've just noticed that they have this consistency of quality content.
Wait, and the Macbeth? Are you talking about the new one with Denzel Washington?
Yes.
Oh, that's out now?
Yeah, on the Apple. So Apple has been delivering a lot of just quality content, but it is a lot of this slow burn, quiet creeping. But it seems like I have a lot of faith that it will deliver because everything else so far has. I don't know if there's any Servant fans watching or who have seen Servant up to where it's at now. That's one of the most bizarre psychological thrillers I've ever watched, because it deals with something that like parents deal with in terms of losing a child at a young age, but then it also plays into this whole thing about it might be ghosts. And every season ends on like it's like it could be canceled and you'd be okay with it being over, but it's definitely not over, because like when the next season comes out, it blows your mind. So I have a lot of faith that this will end nicely, but I doubt it will end in a single season. So I think there's a lot to come with this one.
No, I think there's a lot of potential here. What I think my whole thing is, you can only pose questions for so long in a season before you have to answer at least a couple of them. Not necessarily the major questions, but at least some of the ancillary questions to give us enough food to be able to keep that theorizing going.
Yeah, I like that. That's really well said. I like the idea of them, especially if they use a lot of misnomers and misdirects. I find that to be one of the most fun things, especially about the longer series shows. Like the ones that go seasons in a row where like you're like, oh, they answered that question already. And they're like, no, we did not. We just totally lied to you.
To put this in
I agree. They do need to
put this in a
questions.
to put this in a good analogy that a lot of other sci-fi fans, especially those who are a fan of The Next Generation, will understand. What Carry Out is basically saying is take the best of both worlds cliffhanger and then like just end it with Picard being captured. Okay, and you don't see what happens to him. You don't see that he's assimilated. It just he gets captured and then that's where the season ends. Okay, imagine how much less attractive that show would have been. That ending would have gone down. Whereas instead you see, oh man, he's actually been assimilated. He's now in the collective, and it ends with Riker saying fire. So I think, yeah, I agree, Kirion. What we need is that satisfying like conclusion / build up that also ends with, you know, that can end on a cliffhanger, but we're not going to be left with a bunch more questions like other certain shows that have just, oh yeah, we'll just have a bunch of cliffhangers at the end and then leave you at that and then come back next year. It's like, no, you got to satisfy the audience. Absolutely. But you're right. Not every question has to be answered. And I did take a peek at the IMDb page. This show is slated for 2 seasons. So no, we're not going to get a resolution this season completely, but you're right. It is going to hinge on the audience being satisfied with whatever endings we do get for this season.
Exactly. And again, like it doesn't even necessarily have to be, you know, full answers to some of these questions. Just enough that we can move the theories down the field. Right? Like if you were to kind of think about it like a football game, right? They have to at least give us a couple of first downs through the first season. Enough to make us want to hang in for beyond halftime.
Yeah, I like that. That makes a lot of sense. Like they have to answer some of the theories so that we know if we're on the right track or not. If like we keep having to make up new theories every episode, it gets a little bit daunting and then stops being fun.
Right, you don't want it to turn into the Walking Dead formula where you have like 5 minutes of plot in the opening and then a bunch of drawn out emotional drama in the center to fill your hour, and then conclude it with a, oh my gosh, super scary cliffhanger moment. The end. See you next week. And again, that's okay for a little bit, but that can't become your formula. And so, yeah, I do have my fears about this show slipping into a formulaic pattern. Like, and Game of Thrones was the same way. It was, you know, here's this character. This is why they're cool. And this is why you love them. Oh, they're dead. And then we're going to show a pair of boobies. And then we're just going to rinse and repeat that same thing over and over. And it's like, no. And for me, like season 3 of Game of Thrones fell apart because you had that shocking event that took place. And then your resolution episode was very, So, yeah, I hope that I don't know. Yes, I could see where this show is going to have a potentially amazing ending for this first season while still, we don't know what's going on. We might not quite understand what the corporation does still and still be asking questions about that. But I think there's enough of the consequences and ramifications with the characters that we'll see. We'll just see how that resolves over time, because it's like we do have several questions going on. Well, yes, there's the overarching, well, what's this corporation doing with these people, of course, but we're also starting to get invested in each of these people, and I mean, like, man, it wasn't the break room, I forgot what they called it, where they sent the guy to be read all the stuff about his Audi, but then they also, like, every time he overreacts to a fact, he was like docked points, and it was one of those psychological mind games of, no, that wasn't the break room. It was
the psychiatrist.
Yeah, the psychiatrist. And she's doing a psychological ploy on him to, like, try to make him feel good, but then it's like, no, you're only allowed to feel this good, and you have to feel equally good about everything. And it's the wellness center. The wellness center. And oh man, it's such a so it's scary. I wouldn't want to be an innie, I tell you that much right now. I definitely, if I ever...
Well, the question the series is asking is, if you were an innie, would you even know? Right,
exactly. And they seem to imply that that's not the case. Like, your innie literally just exists awake, constantly working, and that's a scary reality to even contemplate. It's almost like being underway on a ship.
I think that is an interesting thought, because it does seem like the innies are aware that they are innies. From the part like you described earlier in episode 1 at the end, where she's running out the door and just keeps coming back in, which is explained in the second part, like, she's not really coaxed back in the room. She's like reminded that, like, her innie has no idea that she made this decision and is confused. And if she wants to quit, she can, but she, like, shouldn't. And she's like, yeah, no, I just made this choice. Like, I already am 100% aware that this is the choice I want to make. So, like, the Audis are, like, really aware that they're losing time. But the innies, like, I think it's depicted with Mark, the main character, where he comes in hungover, and he's aware that his Audi was hungover. He's like, yeah, he must have got real drunk last night. Like, they have a concept of time, though they don't feel it or perceive it because they're, like, in a windowless room. They do seem to be aware that they only exist for 8 hours. But they do also seem to blame their Audis more than their, like, corporate overlords for anything.
It seems to me that the characters that have been there, I'm not so sure if they're as aware as they want to think themselves aware. Like, they've gotten used to the routine. And so I almost wonder if they're just playing off the idea that they know when they're asleep, but really they're just as insane as everyone else. They just don't want to admit it because they've been conditioned to cope with their work life. Comment in the chat, Cozy Koala 3, split personality disorder type of issues. Yeah, and I think Petey is going to be showing a lot of that in follow-on episodes as he's forced to reconcile memories that he never had for so many years that have all of a sudden been smashed back into his consciousness. So it's going to be interesting to see how it develops, because you're right. The Helly doesn't seem to think that there's any difference between work or there doesn't seem to be any breaks. Like, it's constantly, to her mind, she's continuing to go. Whereas Adam Scott's character and everyone else is like, oh, well, you just get used to it. You feel refreshed. You notice that you're ready to go for the day. And so I almost wonder if maybe due to the psychological conditioning, they think that they're getting their off time, but they're just convincing themselves that, oh yeah, this is normal, when really it's most definitely not. Carry on. Any additional thoughts?
No, I think we've covered it fairly well. I think the only other piece of it I would say is, Apple TV's definitely come out of the gate with some real winners in terms of programming. And, I think it's definitely going to be the sleeper subscription service that's going to be the little subscription service that could over time.
I agree. I started watching some of Foundation. I did actually read that book, and I do want to read the rest of them, and I do want to watch the rest of that series. And I mean, at the very least, the production value is definitely there, but it also seems that it feels, especially for this show, that the writers came out to play. And I mean, that's really the base of your story is in the writing. And without the writing, you can have the greatest visuals of all, but if it's not stated as a visual art piece, it's just not going to work over time. So
Yep.
The writing's definitely good. The acting is superb so far. I mean, everybody, especially Adam Scott, like, he's got the personality switched down. I do believe like it's two separate people at times because of how he interacts with people on the outside world versus his work-life personality, which is totally different. And I think that's really, like I said, I want to see the rest of these actors shine through the rest of the show. And I mean, I like what I'm seeing so far. So anyone got any good theories as to what they expect? I mean, I don't want you to have to set up too much false expectations, but I'm curious to see what everyone thinks is going on so far. John, we'll start with you.
Based on this discussion, I just came up with a whole idea in theory. The idea, if I don't know if you remember, right when Mark goes in the elevator, Adam Scott's character Mark goes in the elevator. Once he hits a certain point in the elevator ride, a door, like a bell, dings, and he wakes into the other body. I wonder how much of this is just standard hypnosis, just known practices of hypnosis, and the whole treatment that they go through and all that thing is just more to solidify the belief in the hypnosis. Like, we think that they were injected with something that causes this separation, but in reality they were just hypnotized. And that's probably where PD is losing his mind, is he probably did some form of drastic medical procedure to like fix his lost memories from the hypnosis. And that could explain like why they're losing memory. Like, because if they mostly the thing with the break room, how do they not remember their experience in the break room? But they also definitely have fear of the break room. So it seems like something's deleted between the time they enter and the time they get out. But how could they delete that on a daily basis? But how could they do that at any given time unless it's something standard like hypnosis? Just a thought.
Yeah, so it seems to me like you're saying it's a combination of hypnosis and the chip as well.
Well, I'm saying it's hypnosis and just constant reinforcement that there was a medical procedure, but never actually describing said procedure and never explaining it, just saying the government or like this happened to you. And because you can't remember, and because like they've obviously not like made you feel like Helly hasn't been to the break room yet, for example. Right. Helly hasn't been directly accosted like everybody else has to some extent or another.
Yeah, and she seems like she's kind of supposed to be the woman on the inside for like we're following Adam Scott outside, but we seem to be introduced to the concept of what his first experience was like through her, sort of. And so it's like we're kind of following. It's kind of brilliant, actually. So you think you're following one main character, but you're also following the other in how she's being introduced into this world and environment.
Right, because she's you.
Right.
You, the audience.
Well, she's
like,
you
as far
on the
as, like,
inside.
Her introduction. Yeah, that's actually really cool. I didn't think about it like that until you just said that.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Okay. So my predictions. I've got a few.
All right.
One. At some point, any person's innie and outie are going to switch. So the innie is going to be outside, and the outie is going to be in the office. Okay, that's one. Because it's just too easy to not do.
I'd like to make my guess onto which one it's going to be real quick. If I had to guess right now, I think it's going to be Irving. If anybody's going to have that happen,
quite possibly. Two, I think the nature of the work is going to be the reason why the severance is needed. That there's something about the work that they're doing that's specific to it. And my third one is the reason why this work is happening is it's so important to the larger world that without it, society or whatever would collapse, or at least that's what we're going to be told. that this is so necessary that the world has accepted that this is like some sort of necessary evil.
That's interesting, because especially when you listen to Mark's recording, when he's saying, "I'm so sorry I let down the whole world," that I think that's going to play a major role in it as well. My thinking though is especially based off of those theories, is it corporate? Is it this corporation that's supposedly saving the world? Is it like a messed up version of Kingsman organization? Like, to what extent? Because it seems like the Severance people are mostly just the data hiders. Like, they don't even know how they're hiding the data, because it's just a feeling that tells them what to delete. And I think that plays a major role into who they're working for. I don't know. That's really cool, though.
Yeah. But those are my theories. So.
No, that's some good discussion. Like I said, this is why it was one of the reasons why I get into sci-fi. I mean, it's exploring the possibilities. And I mean, you know, people think sci-fi, they think Star Wars, Star Trek, which, yeah, I mean, those technically count, but this is also the branch of sci-fi that I feel gets overlooked oftentimes, because it's so grounded in reality, but the concept is very much kind of, I would honestly say that the concept leans more fantasy, because we still don't.
It's definitely science, because this is way medical. Like, they're really trying to harp on the medical procedure, whether there is one or not. I think that shows that it's the medical science fiction.
Oh, they've absolutely done research into neuroscience, and I mean, they definitely did their homework when setting up the premise of this show.
I'm just giving credence to your title of calling this science fiction, because this is medical science fiction.
Well, yeah, it is, but it still kind of leans more into fantasy, because the idea of being able to manipulate memories to that extreme is still a very unknown concept. And you hit on a very good point with the hypnosis, but hypnotherapy is not secure, if you can understand what I'm saying. And what I mean by that is, there's plenty of cases where people get hypnotized and it can either just wear off over time, or in the process of people who do try to do hypnotherapy to do memory blocking, it's not a guarantee. Well, and even if it is, it's usually like a Band-Aid. This show
as a rebuttal to those thoughts, the person who's worked there the longest is Irving, and he's only been there 3 years, and he's like, we see the scene where his mind is melting. Like, it seems like this job affects the innies and the outies like a presidency.
Oh yeah.
And I think that could be a major factor. Like, we don't know how long PD worked there.
Right.
And Mark got promoted over Irving, and even though Irving's the most senior, so like, what does that also tell us? Is that maybe like the smart ones last a year before they PD, and then the other gentleman, I can't remember his name. Let me pull up the IMDb.
Which one? The other employee?
The black
Dylan?
Gentleman.
Played by Zach Cherry?
Zach Cherry. He definitely seems more like what Irving would have started out as. Just somebody who figured out how the system works and works within it. And Hallie is definitely more Mark in his beginning time. So I wonder if we're going to watch as Hallie and Mark keep losing their minds, whereas like Irving and Dylan just kind of keep trying to enjoy it.
Yeah, and I mean, Dylan definitely seems, I've definitely worked with a lot of Dylans in my life who are just like, oh yeah, you know, we get, you know, these little perks and stuff, and this is what's great about working here. And I'm like, this is a piece of crap.
This is
not an incentive. And so it's interesting to see the different personalities that come out of the innies, because you still have those, they still play on the various workplace tropes to use that in the storytelling, whereas Helly is like, you all are crazy to think this is okay, until she started figuring out how to solve data, and then all of a sudden the job starts to make a little bit more sense. So I'm curious to see if I really am interested to see how her character develops, because I could see her going one of two ways. And I mean, there's different ways, obviously, but the one of two ways that I can see it is, the one, you have her slowly start to embrace the work life and she actually likes it. Like the ending to 1984 when she loves Big Brother now. I could see her going that way. I could also see, and that would be even more interesting because then she would become an adversary to Mark, who now may or may not be trying to break out of the system like Petey did, because his innie is probably going to be, because if you notice, his innie is questioning things as well. He took the pictures down when he wasn't supposed to, but he hid one in a separate spot from all the others. Why did he do that? What's his motive? What's going on with Mark's innie that may end up catching up with his outie, so to speak? And then, of course, we haven't seen the concept of whether or not these people can actually dream and what the ramifications of having dreams might look like. Do they dream about work? Do they dream about their innie? Does their innie have any influence in the subconscious to be able to get a hold of them? How did Petey break out? Like, there's so much going on with this show, but it's all extremely compelling. So I think for my theories, I think I think we'll either see Helly either embrace the work life, or she'll start seeing what it is and resist it along with Mark. I don't know. I don't know anything. And it's been a while since I felt the show do that, where it just really gets you to think about theories, but then your theories just kind of derail because you're like, you know what? This is awesome. I'm also just going to enjoy the ride in the process. So, my kind of advice to the audience, and I guess to everyone here, would just be, yeah, let's keep having our theories, but don't do what I did with Rogue One and cling to them as law. Then you're just setting yourself up for disappointment. But I do feel good about this show. It's kind of more of an irrational fear about it not working out. So I think it's going to be good. And like I said, the concept of itself makes this worthwhile to watch. I'm going to watch every episode of probably both seasons and see where it goes.
Good night, everybody.